Canada stretches from the Atlantic to the Pacific and northward into the Arctic Ocean. Its landscape comprises the rugged Rocky Mountains, expansive boreal forests, and more lake area than any other nation on Earth. Toronto sits on the northwestern shore of Lake Ontario, serving as the cultural heart of eastern Canada with a highly diverse metropolitan footprint. Vancouver rests in southwestern British Columbia, tightly pinched between the Strait of Georgia and the towering, snow-capped coast mountains. Japan spans a stratovolcanic archipelago of over 14,000 islands in eastern Asia. The terrain is overwhelmingly mountainous and heavily forested, forcing its dense population into narrow coastal plains. Tokyo sits at the head of Tokyo Bay on the eastern coast of Honshu, transforming from a historic fishing village into a massive, neon-lit hyperurban center. Kyoto is nestled in a valley within the mountainous Kansai region, remaining an untouched sanctuary of traditional Japanese culture and historical architecture. Brazil dominates the eastern half of South America, running from the flat, dense wilderness of the Amazon basin down to the rugged Atlantic highlands and fertile southern agricultural plains. São Paulo is perched on an inland plateau within the Brazilian highlands, sprawling outward across hundreds of square kilometers of dense architectural high-rises. Rio de Janeiro curves along the western shore of Guanabara Bay, backed by steep, forested granitic mountains that shoot straight out of the ocean line. Australia sits between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Its terrain is primarily low-lying, arid plateau known as the Outback, framed by fertile coastal plains along the eastern and southern rims. Sydney sits on the Tasman Sea coast, split by the winding inlets of Port Jackson and backed by the rolling sandstone valleys of the Blue Mountains. Melbourne fans out around the large natural bay of Port Phillip, bisected by the slow-moving waters of the Yarra River in southeastern Australia. France features a diverse topography ranging from the flat northern coastal plains to the massive alpine peaks of the Alps and Pyrenees, flanked by the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean. Paris is positioned on a sweeping loop of the Seine River in the center of the fertile limestone basin known as the Paris Basin. Marseille is built along a rugged, crescent-shaped bay on the southern coast, framed by white limestone cliffs known as Calanques. India is bounded by the towering arc of the Himalayas to the north, sloping down into the flat Indo-Gangetic plains, the Drytha Desert, and the massive volcanic plateau of the Deccan. New Delhi sits on the banks of the Yamuna River in northern India, functioning as an expansive metropolis built alongside historic Old Delhi. Mumbai occupies what was originally a cluster of 7 islands on the western coast, now consolidated into a high-density, hyperactive peninsula. The UK includes Great Britain and Northern Ireland, defined by rolling green lowlands in the south and east, turning into rugged, glaciated highlands in the north and west. London spans the navigable waters of the River Thames in southeastern England, a historic trade hub built on flat alluvial soils. Edinburgh sits on the southern shore of the Firth of Forth, constructed around the jagged remains of extinct volcanic crags. South Africa features an expansive interior plateau framed by the dramatic escarpment of the Drakensberg Mountains, giving way to narrow, temperate coastal strips. Johannesburg is located on the mineral-rich ridge of the Witwatersrand, making it one of the largest cities not built on a major river or coast. Cape Town nestles neatly between the Atlantic Ocean and the flat-topped northern front of Table Mountain on the southwest edge of the continent. Germany transitions smoothly from the flat, low-lying North European plain up through central forested highlands to the rugged, glaciated peaks of the Bavarian Alps. Berlin lies in the flat marshy woodlands of northeastern Germany, built along the banks of the Spree and Havel rivers. Munich sits on an elevated alpine plateau just north of the Alps, bisected by the fast-flowing glacial waters of the Isar River. China's territory cascades westward from fertile coastal floodplains and deltas up into rugged hills, harsh western deserts, and the immense, freezing heights of the Tibetan Plateau. Beijing sits at the northern tip of the flat North China Plain, backed by semi-arid mountain ridges that guard the city from northern steppes. Shanghai sits on the eastern edge of the Yangtze River Delta, split down the middle by the commercial artery of the Huangpu River. Mexico features 2 massive mountain chains, the Sierra Madre Occidental and Oriental, framing a high, dry central plateau, flanked by tropical coastal plains. Mexico City sits in a high-altitude volcanic basin over 2,200 meters up, completely ringed by active and dormant mountain peaks. Guadalajara sits on an elevated plain within the Atamajac Valley, acting as a major technology manufacturing hub. Italy is shaped like a boot, dominated by the rugged spine of the Apennine Mountains running north-south and the massive arc of the Alps guarding its northern border. Rome is built along the banks of the Tiber River in central Italy, spreading across its historic 7 hills near the Tyrrhenian coast. Venice spans a cluster of 118 small islands inside the marshy Venetian lagoon along the northern Adriatic Sea. Russia ranges from the flat European plains across the old Ural Mountains into the vast, freezing taiga of Siberia and the volcanic rings of the Far East. Moscow sits in an undulating basin in western Russia, built along the loops of the Moscow River amid dense mixed forests. St. Petersburg is spread across the swampy delta islands of the Neva River at the easternmost tip of the Gulf of Finland. South Korea is mountainous, covering the southern half of the Korean peninsula. Its rugged terrain slopes down to flat coastal plains in the west and south. Seoul is divided cleanly into northern and southern halves by the wide Han River, surrounded by rocky granite mountains. Busan sits on the southeastern tip of the peninsula, squeezed tightly between rugged coastal mountains and the Tsushima Strait. Argentina features the massive wall of the Andes Mountains to its west, dropping into the dry scrub of the Gran Chaco and the vast, fertile grasslands of the Pampas. Buenos Aires sits on the flat western shore of the Rio de la Plata, the massive estuary feeding into the Atlantic Ocean. Mendoza is located on a high-altitude plain at the littoral foot of the Andes, relying on glacial meltwater canals to survive. New Zealand comprises two primary islands. The North Island is heavily volcanic and hilly, while the South Island is split by the glaciated Southern Alps. Auckland occupies a narrow volcanic isthmus between two major harbours, linking the Pacific Ocean to the Tasman Sea. Wellington is wedged into a tight, geologically active harbour at the southern tip of the North Island, bordering Cook Strait. Pakistan ranges from the snow-covered peaks of the Hindu Kush and Karakoram down through the fertile Indus River basin into the dry sands of the south. Islamabad is built against the scenic backdrop of the Magalla Hills on the elevated Potohar Plateau in northern Pakistan. Karachi is situated on the flat, arid coastline of the Arabian Sea, spreading out from natural deep-water harbours. Turkey occupies the high, semi-arid Anatolian Plateau, pinched between the Black Sea to the north and the warm Mediterranean coast to the south. Istanbul straddles the strategic Bosphorus Strait, controlling the narrow water passage between the Sea of Marmara and the Black Sea. Ankara rests in the rugged centre of the Anatolian Plateau, built around a historic fortified volcanic hill. Indonesia sits along the Pacific Ring of Fire, a massive string of highly volcanic islands covered in dense tropical rainforest and bordered by deep ocean trenches. Jakarta sits on a flat, marshy alluvial plain on the northwest coast of Java, intersected by 13 distinct rivers. Yogyakarta is located in central Java, positioned directly between the southern Indian Ocean and the active volcano Mount Merapi. Spain covers most of the Iberian Peninsula, characterized by a high central plateau known as the Meseta Central, framed by rugged mountain ridges. Madrid is built on the sand and clay hills of the high Meseta Plateau, sitting along the small Manzanares River. Barcelona occupies a sloping plain on the northeast coast, tightly bounded by the sea and the Colserola Hills. Kenya is split cleanly down the middle by the immense Great Rift Valley, transitioning from low coastal plains up to high volcanic highlands. Nairobi is positioned on an elevated plateau over 1,700 meters up, sitting between the standard low savanna and the cool central highlands. Mombasa occupies a strategic coral island inside a natural deep-water harbour on the tropical Indian Ocean coast. Greece features a highly fractured landscape of mountainous peninsulas and over 2,000 rocky islands scattered throughout the Aegean and Ionian seas. Athens is situated within a dry, mountain-ringed basin in the southern Attica region, opening out toward the Saronic Gulf. Thessaloniki stretches along the inner edge of the Thermaic Gulf, serving as the premier northern gateway to the Balkans. Colombia is unique for having both Pacific and Caribbean coastlines, split internally into three distinct parallel ridges of the high Andes Mountains. Bogotá sits on an expansive, chilly plateau known as the Savanna of Bogotá, elevated over 2,600 meters up in the eastern Andes. Medellin is built deep inside the narrow Abura Valley, climbing steep mountain slopes on all sides. Thailand features a central alluvial basin formed by the Chao Phraya River, ringed by rugged mountains to the north and narrow tropical coasts to the south. Bangkok spans the flat delta plains of the Chao Phraya River, sitting just north of the shallow Gulf of Thailand. Chiang Mai is located in a broad intermontane basin along the Ping River, surrounded by the highest mountain peaks in the country. Nigeria ranges from tropical mangrove swamps along the Atlantic coast up through lush rainforests into dry savanna plateaus in the far north. Lagos is built over a complex system of coastal lagoons, sandbars, and islands bordering the Bight of Benin. Abuja sits in the middle of the country within the rolling hills of the Federal Capital Territory, dominated by monolithic rock formations.